All right, everyone, welcome back to day 2. Today, we're going to have a chilled conversation about what it's like being a software engineer. All right, I'm Zhia, and a little bit of context about myself. If you haven't been on this channel, I'm a software engineer manager at a big tech company, and I've been in the software engineering world for close to 12 years now. Yesterday, I was talking about my experience growing up and how I got into computer science, and I thought that's really interesting. It might be useful for some people who are thinking about, hey, do you need to go to a big name brand name school in order to get a computer science degree before you can work for a big tech? And from my experience, I didn't go to a brand name school, right? My school was not any of the big tech schools that usually recruit from, Stanford, Berkeley, and all of that. So in my opinion, right, from my experience, I don't think it's really necessary. But I do think what's important is that the ability to learn, pick things up, and understand and work with people really well. And today I wanted to talk a little bit more about after I finished up my school, and then what was it like being a software engineer, and what was my experience interviewing around and things like that. Let's start. And this was in 2013 when I graduated from college, and this was on the up and up for tech in general, because that's when Facebook was getting bigger. Google obviously has been there for quite some time. A lot of startups, a lot of booming tech happening around that time. So in my opinion, I think the macroeconomics of it just dictates that there will be a lot of opportunities for people graduating with a computer science degree. The tide, right, lifts all boats, right? Anyone who graduated with a computer science degree or anything that shows on your resume that you had some work done with computers probably would give you a pretty good chance of getting hired. Though, with that said, I didn't get hired into a big tech company at the time after I graduated, so take that with a grain of salt. When I did graduate, even though I worked at several, or actually worked at one startup as an intern, an iOS developer, I didn't have a specialization, and I didn't have a lot of experience being in the industry. I only had maybe 1 or 2 months of industry experience at that point. And I didn't know at the time that lead code was actually a thing. So, as you probably imagine, in school, I was very much heads down, just focusing on my coursework, my assignments, and things like that. So I never really took the time to socialize or understand what's going on in the industry. And what happened was, when I started interviewing, a lot of the interviewers were asking questions related to lead code or asking me to solve some sort of simple programming problems. And I really struggled with those. For example, they're asking you to find a thing or in a binary search tree, or hey, how do you turn a binary tree into a linked list? Right? These types of questions were being asked, and I didn't know how to do them, because in school, most of the things that you learn are like, how do you do simple operations like search, delete, rebalance the trees, and things like that. So it's more focused on the theoretical side, not as much on the application side. So there was a gap for me. And I completely bombed all of the interviews I had. I remember very distinctly, I had one interview with Apple, and Apple for me was the dream company, iPhones, iPads, all the things that they were building. So I really wanted to get to Apple. I had my interview with them. It was just a phone interview. I was super excited at the time when they responded to my application. And then I was like, oh, this is gonna be my chance to get into Apple. I'm gonna be an Apple engineer. So I did my interview, and then in that phone interview, they were asking me a very simple question. They were just kind of asking me, I don't remember exactly what the question was, but I think it was fairly straightforward. And I completely bombed it. I didn't know how to execute on it. I was, trying to figure out what's the function calls for C++, and I was trying to figure out, I was just stumbling left and right. I was completely bombed it. And there was a 45-minute call. About 30 minutes in or so, and then the interviewer knew that it was not going really well, so he tried to change direction and give me some different opportunities to shine. So he was asking me about, what do you know about inheritance, right, in programming languages? Can you give me an example of what it is? How would this thing do that? If you had an animal class, what would this animal class do? And things like that, right? So really giving me, at least trying to give me an opportunity to kind of shine that way. So it was kind of nice of that person. But eventually, of course, I didn't get it, and I was very sad for a very long time. And that was sort of a wake-up call for myself at that point. I just felt like, oh man, I just spent 4 years computer science degree, completely wasted, bombed that interview. I don't think I was gonna be able to get a job in tech ever, right? That feeling of being rejected, that feeling of being powerless, and you feel that, you know, there's nothing that could help you get into the industry that you really wanted to get into. And this was at a point where I just graduated 4 years from college with a computer science degree. My GPA was pretty good, you know, it wasn't like amazing, but I didn't fail all my courses or anything like that. So coming from college where you're doing pretty well and then into the industry and then you're getting rejected left and right and you couldn't solve simple interview questions, that was the final straw for me. So what that did for me was then I realized, oh, well, if people are asking these types of questions and all the companies are looking for these types of answers for them, then I probably should focus more on doing those types of things then, right? So I was like, okay, it's pretty simple. You know, these are like taking exams at that point for me. And you know how Asians are really good at taking exams. So I spent quite a bit of time just going through LeetCode. Oh, and boy, it was such a struggle doing LeetCode for the very first time, because if you probably know, right? If you've done 1 or 2 questions and that's your first time doing it, it's such a pain, because for me at the time I was using C++, so I had to brush up on, you know, all these things about how do you index, how do you manage your pointers, how do you control this, trying to manipulate a string and things like that. And it took me a lot of time. I think my first month I solved maybe 4, 5, or 6 questions, and even then I had to rely a lot on looking at the solutions to understand what it was actually like. It was a very long time, and but I was pretty diligent, right? So after college I spent maybe 3-4 months just kind of sat down. I didn't leave my room. I was renting a room at the time with a couple friends, and I just stayed in my room, heads down, just studying LeetCode nonstop. And I remember I had this notebook. I don't know if I can find it right now, but it's somewhere in there. I gotta look it up sometime. But it had all the notes I had in there, every single notes around what are the data structures I needed to use, what are the solutions I had for them, what are the types of problems I solved. And one thing about me is that I'm a pretty dedicated person. So once I set my mind to something, I can sort of like pre-plan things ahead, say like, okay, I'm gonna spend the next 2 months trying to crack this thing. And if I wanted to do that, what are the things I need to do? So I'll start kind of laying out my plan. And for me, I had about 2 months to find a job at that point, because I was on the visa, right? So I only had about 1 or 2 months at the time to get a job. So I planned out, okay, here's my calendar. If I need to get a job by the end of 2 months, at what point I need to start interviewing, and when do I need to get an offer? So I kind of planned it out for like 60 days. And then from there, I kind of work backwards and figure out, okay, how many questions I need to do in order to get fully prepared for interviews. I kind of work backwards and figured out, okay, I think there are about 100. So LeetCode back in 2013 didn't have that many questions. Today, it's like 1,000 over, crazy, insane. And I know there are tons of people who do almost all of them. But for me at the time, there was maybe 400, I think, 300-400 questions in 2013. So, you know, I think I randomly picked them. I don't think I was that structured in knowing which ones are the most important, but I picked, you know, 100, 150 of the more commonly seen ones, and I just kind of figured out, okay, I'm going to do 2 questions a day, 150, but that's probably more than that, right? So it's going to take me like 75 days just to complete 150 questions. So I think I started out pretty slowly, 1 or 2 questions, and then eventually really picked up the pace, and I was able to kind of run through 2, 3, maybe 4 questions a day. And since I was full-time just doing LeetCode, I had no distractions. I wasn't going to the gym. I wasn't going to classes. I wasn't going partying or anything. Like for me, I'm not a big party person, so I skip all of that. So Monday through Sunday, I was just doing LeetCode. So I had full time just to prepare on this thing. And I can't say this was definitely a really tough time, because it was I kind of think of like the anime or a lot of like cartoon where, you kind of put your little bandana on or like your headband, and then you're like, oh, I'm gonna do this thing, right? I was drinking Red Bull, I was drinking coffee, I was just kind of heads down in my room, just studying for like the full 2 months. And then after that, I started applying, and eventually, a lot of crazy stories to share about this. So after I did this, lead code preparation, and as a new grad, that's kind of only thing that you need to do. Prepare for interviews with lead code, understanding a little bit about like what the things you did in college was. Then I started to get into job application. And that was another interesting story, right? I was trying to like click, kind of apply to all the jobs that I could, but the response rates were I guess that's kind of interesting, because I was saying earlier where this was the time when a lot of companies were hiring, but now also like the response rates were low. What was going on? I don't know what really happened there, but for me, I'm a very systems process based kind of guy, where I thought, okay, if I'm applying to 10 jobs and maybe 1 responses to it, then in order to increase my odds of actually finding a job, I need to apply more. So instead of applying to 10 jobs, I need to apply to 100 jobs. But then the thinking is, if I get to 100 jobs, 1,000 jobs, right? And then I have let's say 1% response. 100 jobs is gonna get me I guess 1% is too low, maybe 10%, right? 100 job applications is gonna result in 10 responses. And then out of those 10 responses, maybe I'm gonna do 5 interviews and then I might land 1. Right? So that was the thinking process. Like, if you think about it from a funnel perspective, to increase your odds, you gotta do more, you gotta apply more. So instead of just applying 10 or 5 per day, how can I increase the applications so I can increase my odds? So then instead of just manually clicking through them, I start looking into, there are some job boards that allows you to mass apply. I don't remember what the platforms were at the time, but that was, I think, a pretty common kind of thing that you could do on the. Then I also decided to take it into my own hands, but those platforms didn't really work for me. I applied to a whole bunch of them, and then at some point they were asking me to pay money for it, and I was a student at the time. I'm not used to paying money for things, so I was like, screw this, I'm not gonna pay any money for this. And then what I realized was there was a platform called Craigslist. And Craigslist has a section called jobs, and that's where people are posting jobs on there, random things, right? It could be from trucks, people needs to get fixed, there are bikes that need to get fixed, mechanics, odd jobs like mowing lawns. But then there's also a section for software engineering. So this was where people were posting their software engineering jobs, internships on Craigslist, and you had the option to filter by city. So I wanted to stay in Seattle because that's where my friends were. So I wanted to stay in Seattle. I looked into Seattle and I noticed there were a lot of jobs on there. And this was, Craigslist was free. As a user, you could just click on all of them. So what I then realized was, okay, I could potentially build a script that will apply to all these jobs for me. And that was exactly what I did, right? So I didn't know a lot of things about like parsing websites. I didn't know a lot about, how do you kind of paginate through a website, right? So I was kind of determined. I was like, okay, if I'm going to do computer science, I know kind of little things about this. And if I know how to automate things, this is going to save me so much time. So that's exactly what I did. I just went online, kind of Google and search for how do you parse a website, or how do you automate doing things on a website. And a lot of links came up. There was like Python, there's like C++, there's like Java implementations. They were saying, okay, you can use a browserless home, or you could use like this. There's so many things that popped up, like completely new world I'd never seen before. But I somehow managed to cobble things together to build a script that would do exactly what I wanted it to do. It would just apply to all the jobs that it saw, and then it would mark the ones that I had already applied. And anytime a new job comes up, I'll be like the first one to apply to that job. Like, it was running 24/7. Pretty cool, I thought, because it's a very cool story. This was fully automated. It was just keep running all the time. So instead of me going to like apply to all of those jobs whenever they show up, the script would do it for me. And it does it like the first thing the posting goes live. super efficient. And I had it dump a report of like, okay, all the jobs I'd applied to, like the links to Craigslist, was like the description of the job, and then kind of all of those things. It worked really well, I thought, because then I started to get a lot of responses from people. They're like, hey, I saw that you applied, and some of the things I did in there was I kind of realized it was a lot of like trial and error. If you start building this thing and then your message that you send, if it's too generic, people generally don't respond to it. So this one I realized, I saw like, my response rates were pretty low. I was kind of applying like 10, 20 jobs, and then it was not as good as if I had applied to them on my own. So that was my realization. I was like, okay, I gotta customize this thing to make it a little bit smarter. That's what I did. I tried to extract some keywords from the description to make it a little bit more personalized. It's fine. I'm not using that script anymore, so I can tell you guys this, right? So I was using, if you was asking like, hey, they're looking for like a mobile engineer, and then in my response, I'll say like, hey, I noticed that you're looking for X, and then X is my parameter where I was extracting keywords from the list or from the article that they were posting, like their job posting. So I'll say like, hey, I noticed that you're looking for X, and then that could be like a mobile developer, iOS developer, web developer, whatever it is, based on the keywords that I extracted out. And then it'll say, okay, I noticed that you're looking for X. Here's my background, and I have a background that I kind of listed out, and it had a pretty wide range of things, from web to iOS, Android development, whatever it is. And then here's my resume. I would attach to it, and I'll say, thank you. Here's my phone number. I would love to hear from you. And I'm in the Seattle area. I would love to grab time to kind of chat anytime you're available. So this actually worked out really good, because I got a lot of responses after that from a script, and this saved me so much time because I could then spend more on just understanding and learning lead code I was doing earlier. And then also this became a really interesting story that I would tell in my behavioral questions when they're asking me, hey, what's a really cool project that you worked on? And I'll try to like obfuscate some of the details so they don't know that I applied to the job from this, because I didn't feel it was a good story to tell. But thinking back, maybe now it's not. I actually think it's a pretty good idea. It's like a pretty hacky kind of thing. It's kind of fun. It's there's no harm in it, right? I'm not harming anyone. I'm not lying. I'm not cheating or anything like that. But it gave me a really good learning opportunity, right? It was something that I needed. Solve a problem that I had, and I was able to get it to work. And just the fact that I'm sitting in front of you right now, it just means that my thing actually worked. So that was like my story of how I applied to jobs. And I don't know if that would work as well today, because I haven't looked into Craigslist for a while now. But I think it always takes a little bit of creativity in order to get the things that you want done. So yeah, if you guys are interested, and I would kind of love to hear from you guys, right? What are the hacky things or like creative things that you guys did in order to either get a job or get something done? Because I think that's always interesting to know, and it's very inspiring because it helps people think about what are the things they potentially do. Cool. Yeah, that was my day 2, and I'll see you day 3 tomorrow. Bye.